Hello everybody, and today I'm bringing you another storytime video. Today I'm dressed up as everybody's favorite sidekick to the Joker, Harley Quinn. Just so you know, I won't be doing her voice through this video because I can't keep up with that accent and I can't do it anyway. So today's story is from a book that I've had for a few years. It's called A Golden Book. It's definitely not little, and it is Walt Disney's classic movie Treasury. There are a few stories in here. It has 10 stories in it, but I'm only going to be reading one from it today. So I think I'm just going to, as the story times develop, work my way through the stories. So the first one is Bambi. These are going to be a little longer because there's a lot more words, but I will do my best to show you the pictures that are with them. So, let's read Bambi. Bambi came into the world in the middle of a thicket, one of those little hidden forest glades. Seemed to be open, but are really screened in on all sides. The Magpie was the first to discover him. "What a beautiful child!" she cried, and she flew off through the forest to tell the news. "The young prince is born!" Her chattering brought dozens of birds and animals toward the thicket. Even the owl, who had settled down for his long day's sleep, was awakened by a baby rabbit thumping at the base of his tree. With a sigh, the owl spread his wings and flew off with the others to the thicket. There he found the squirrels and rabbits and birds peering through the undergrowth at a doe and a little spotted fawn. The owl was the first to speak. "This is quite an occasion," he said. "It isn't often that a young prince is born. Congratulations." The doe looked up. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then she nudged her sleeping baby gently with her nose. "Wake up," she whispered. "Wake up." The fawn lifted his head and looked around. He looked frightened and edged closer to his mother's body. She licked him reassuringly and nudged him again. He pushed up on his thin hind legs, trying to stand. His forelegs kept crumpling, but at last they bore his weight, and he stood beside his mother. "What are you going to name the young prince?" asked the baby rabbit. "I'll call him Bambi," the mother answered. "Bambi," repeated the rabbit. "That's a good name. My name's Thumper." And he hopped away with his mother and sisters. The little fawn sank down and nestled close to his mother. She licked his spotted red coat softly. The birds and animals slipped away through the forest, leaving the thicket in peace and quiet. The forest was beautiful in the summer. The trees stood still under the sky, and out of the earth came troops of flowers, unfolding their red, white, and yellow stars. Here, I'll show you a picture from the first page. So Bambi and his mother, and all the animals. Bambi liked to follow his mother down the forest paths, so narrow that the thick leafy bushes stroked his flanks as he passed. Sometimes a branch tripped him or a bush tangled about his legs, but always his mother walked easily and surely. There were friends all along these forest paths. The squirrels and chipmunks looked up and called, "Good morning, young prince." The opossums, hanging by their long tails from the branches of a tree, said, "Hello, Prince Bambi." As Bambi and his mother reached a little clearing in the forest, they met Thumper and his family. "Come on, Bambi," said Thumper. "Let's play." "Yes, let's play," cried the other little rabbits, hopping over branches and hillocks and tufts of grass, dancing around the little fawn so rapidly that he looked at them in amazement. But he soon understood and began to run on his stiff, spindly legs. He leapt over a low branch, stumbled, and fell. Thumper urged him up again, and Bambi scrambled to his feet and leapt up in the air for joy. Thumper leapt over a fallen log, and Bambi followed, but his long legs did not clear the log, and he fell with a thud on top of it. As he untangled his legs and slid down the far side of the log, he saw a family of birds on a low branch. Bambi stared at them. These are birds, Bambi, Thumper said. Birds. Birds, said Bambi slowly. It was his first word. Bambi was pleased with himself. He repeated the word over and over to himself. When he saw a butterfly flutter across the path, he cried, "Bird! Bird!" Again. "No, Bambi," said Thumper. "That's not a bird. That's a butterfly." Bambi watched the butterfly disappear into the bushes. Then he saw a clump of yellow flowers, and he bounced towards them. "Butterfly!" he cried. "No, Bambi," said Thumper. "Not butterfly. Flower." He hopped forward and pushed his nose into the flowers. Bambi did the same, pleased with the sweet smell. Suddenly he drew back. His nose had touched something furry and warm. Out from the bed of flowers came a small black head with 2 gleaming eyes. "Flower!" said Bambi. "That's not a flower," Thumper said with a giggle. "Skunk!" Oh, and there's the... Oh, no. Ironically, they did name the skunk Flower. "Flower," said Bambi again. "The young prince can call me Flower, if he wants to," said the skunk. "I don't mind. In fact, I like it." Bambi had made another friend. One morning, Bambi and his mother walked down a path where the little fawn had never been before. The trail ended with a tangle of vines and bushes. A few steps more and they would be in a bright, open space. Bambi wanted to bound forward, but his mother stopped him. "What is it?" he asked impatiently. "It is the meadow," his mother replied. She stood motionless, holding her head high and listening intently. "Wait here until I call you," she said. "The meadow is not always safe. If you see me turn back, run as fast as you can." Bambi never took his eyes off his mother as she walked out with slow, cautious steps. He saw how she listened in all directions. Then she called, "Come!" Bambi bounded out. Joy seized him and he leapt into the air 3, 4, 5 times. "Catch me!" his mother cried. And she bounded forward. Bambi started after her. He felt as if he were flying, without any effort. As he stopped for breath, a large green frog suddenly hopped out from the clover at his feet and into a small pond. Bambi followed it and peered down at the water, where it had disappeared. As the ripples cleared, he saw his own image and jumped back. Then he looked again and saw 2 images, side by side. He jumped again, lifted his head, and saw a small fawn standing beside him. "Hello," she said, moving nearer to him. Bambi backed timidly away, tripped over a root, and tumbled to the ground. He scrambled to his feet and bounded away to hide behind his mother. "Don't be afraid, Bambi," said his mother. "That is little Feline. Her mother is your Aunt Edna." "Come and play, Bambi," Feline said, dancing towards him. Bambi turned and dashed away as fast as he could run. Feline gave a leap and ran after him. Soon they were romping, chasing each other around bushes and racing around hillocks. Suddenly out of the woods came the sound of hoofbeats. Branches snapped, boughs rustled, and figures burst out of the forest. They tore by like the wind, made a wide circle on the grassy meadow, and vanished into the woods again, where they could be heard galloping away. "Who are they?" Bambi asked. "They are the fathers," said Feline excitedly. Out of the woods they came bursting again and suddenly stood still. Bambi stopped breathlessly to look at them. They looked like his mother and Aunt Edna, but their heads were crowned with gleaming antlers. Then Bambi saw, standing on a rock high above the meadow, a great stag who was larger, stronger, and more dignified than all the others. Every animal stood still as the great stag slowly descended, passing the other deer without so much as a glance. When he approached Bambi, the little fawn almost stopped breathing. The stag stopped, lowered his head, and looked searchingly at Bambi. Then he turned and walked away slowly into the woods. When he had disappeared, Bambi ran to his mother. "That was the great prince of the forest," she said. "He is very brave and very wise." "Mother, did you see?" said Bambi excitedly. "He stopped and looked at me." Just as Bambi was about to start off to find Feline to tell her his news, the great stag dashed back on to the meadow and uttered one dreadful word: "Man!" Instantly, birds and animals, crying and squawking, rushed towards the woods. As Bambi and his mother disappeared into the protection of the trees and bushes, they heard behind them on the meadow several loud, roaring noises, terrifying to Bambi's ears. Later, as Bambi and his mother lay safely in their thicket, his mother explained, "Man, Bambi, it was Man in the meadow. He brings danger and death to the forest with his long stick that roars and spurts flames. Someday you will understand." As time passed, Bambi learned many things. He knew by ear the sound the field mice make, the soft tread of the pheasants, the patter of the moles. He could sniff the air and tell how things stood on the meadow. Oh, forgot to show the pictures. One morning he woke up shivering with cold. His nose told him there was something strange in the world. When he looked out through the thicket, he saw everything covered with white. "It's snow, Bambi," his mother said. "Go ahead and walk out." Cautiously, Bambi stepped on the surface of the snow and saw his feet sink down into it. The air was calm and the sun on the white snow sparkled. Bambi was delighted. As he walked, stepping high and carefully, a breeze shifted a branch above him ever so slightly, just enough to tip a heavy load of snow on Bambi's head. He jumped high in the air, startled and frightened, and then ran on, licking the snow from his nose. It tasted good, clean and cool. Thumper was playing on the ice-covered pond, and Bambi trotted gingerly down the slope and out onto the smooth ice too. His front legs shot forward, his rear legs slipped back, and down he crashed. He looked up to see Thumper laughing at him. He finally lurched to his feet and skidded across the ice dizzily, landing headfirst in a snowbank on the shore. As he pulled himself out of the drift, he and Thumper heard a faint sound of snoring. Peering down into a deep burrow, they saw the little skunk lying peacefully asleep on a bed of withered flowers. "Wake up, Flower!" Bambi called. "Is it spring yet?" Flower asked sleepily. "No, winter's just beginning," said Bambi. "I'm hibernating," the little skunk said with a smile. "Flowers always sleep in the winter." And he dozed off again. So Bambi learned about winter. It was a difficult time for all the animals in the forest. Food grew scarce. Sometimes Bambi and his mother had to strip bark from trees and eat it. At last, when it seemed they could find no more to eat, there was a change in the air. Thin sunshine filtered through the bare branches, and the air was a little warmer. That day, too, Bambi's mother dug under the soft snow and found a few blades of pale green grass. Bambi and his mother were nibbling at the grass when they suddenly smelled Man. As they lifted their heads, there came a deafening roar like thunder. "Quick, Bambi," said his mother. "Run for the thicket. Don't stop, no matter what happens." Bambi darted away and heard his mother's footsteps behind him. Then came another roar from Man's guns. Bambi dashed among the trees in terrified speed, but when he came at last to the thicket, his mother was not in sight. He sniffed the air for her smell, listened for her hoofbeats. There was nothing. Bambi raced out into the forest, calling wildly as for his mother. Silently, the great stag appeared beside him. "Your mother can't be with you any more," the stag said. "You must learn to walk alone." In silence, Bambi followed the great stag through the snow-filled forest. At last it was spring, the willows shed their catkins, everything was turning green, and the leaves looked fresh and smiling. Bambi was standing in front of a tree, beating his new antlers against the wood to loosen the old skin that covered them. "Stop that!" cried an irritated voice above him. Bambi looked up and saw the owl, who sat on a branch of the tree, swaying from Bambi's blows against the trunk. "Go away from here and let me sleep," complained the owl. "First, all the twitter-pated lovebirds are so noisy and that they drive me out of my nest. Then you come along and shake me to pieces." Bambi sighed and walked off alone until he came to the pond. There on the glassy surface he saw not only his own reflection, with the new fine antlers towering above his head, but the reflection of another deer. He looked up. "Hello, Bambi," said the other deer. "Don't you remember me? I'm Feline." Bambi stared at her. Feline was now a graceful and beautiful doe. A strange excitement swept over Bambi. When Feline trotted up and licked his face, Bambi started to dash away. But after a few steps he stopped. Feline dashed into the bushes and Bambi followed. Suddenly, Rano, a buck with big antlers, ran from the woods and stood between Bambi and Feline. "Stop!" he cried. "Feline is going with me." Bambi stood still as Rano nudged Feline down the path. He felt the blood pounding in his head. Suddenly he shot forward, Rano turned with head lowered, and they charged together with a crash. Rano tossed Bambi to the ground, but he was on his feet again in a flash, charging blindly. Again and again they came together, forehead to forehead. Then Bambi braced his hind legs and hurled himself on Rano. A prong broke from Rano's antlers, a terrific blow tore open his shoulder, and he fell to the ground, sliding down a rocky embankment. As Rano limped off into the forest, Bambi and Feline walked away through the woods. At night they trotted onto the meadow, where they stood in the moonlight, listening to the east wind and the west wind calling to each other. Early one morning in the autumn, Bambi and Feline were asleep in the thicket. Suddenly Bambi raised his head and sniffed the air. Quietly, he stepped from the thicket and went to a high cliff. Please excuse the neighbor's dog if you can hear it. There the wind brought him the scent of man. As he looked, the great stag came and stood beside him. "Yes, Bambi, it's man," he said. "A great many of them, with tents and campfires. We must go to the hills." Bambi ran back to the thicket for Feline, but Feline had awakened at the call of the crows screaming a warning overhead. She had dashed down a path calling, "Bambi! Bambi!" The fearful sounds of man came closer, and the barking of dogs struck terror to her heart. Bambi heard her calls and dashed toward her. He lunged at the dogs surrounding the ledge on which she stood and threw them into a whining mass. "Jump, Feline!" Bambi cried. Feline quickly jumped from the ledge and dashed into the woods. Bambi charged furiously and then scrambled up a steep bank of loose rocks and raced through the woods. The roar of a gun crashed almost beside him. Bambi sprang into the air and dashed blindly ahead as a killing pain shot through him and a thin burning thread ran down from his shoulder. He stopped at last. It was comfortable just to lie there and rest. "Up, Bambi! Get up!" The old stag was standing beside him and nudging his shoulder gently. Bambi wanted to answer, "I can't," but something in the old stag's voice made him get up. "Good," said the old stag. "Now come with me. The forest has caught fire from the flames of man's campfires. We must go to the river." He walked swiftly ahead. Bambi followed, though he felt a terrible desire to drop to the ground. The smoke grew thicker, and he could hear the crackling roar of flames. Other animals, large and small, were dashing through the woods too. Now they were completely encircled by the fire. The old stag stopped. "The river is just beyond that wall of flames," he said. "We must go through." They plunged into the raging fire. Smoke filled Bambi's lungs and blinded his eyes. Flames licked his sides. Then he stumbled over a rock and fell into cool, rushing water. Down the stream they went, over a roaring waterfall into deep water. Then on again to an island in the middle of the river. Panting and breathless, Bambi struggled onto the safe shore, already crowded with other animals. With a cry of joy, Feline came running to him and gently licked the wound in his shoulder. Thumper was there, and Flower. Together the friends stood on the shore and watched the flames destroy their forest home. Once more winter came to the forest, and the white snow covered the scars left by the fire. Then in the spring green leaves appeared, grass and flowers and wild shrubs. Again, news went through the forest. Come along, come to the thicket. Everyone is going to see. At the thicket, the squirrels and rabbits and birds were peering through the undergrowth at Feline and 2 spotted fawns. And high above them, on the cliff, where the tired old stag had bade him goodbye, Bambi stood watching. Bambi, proud father, and the new great prince of the forest. I know the story of Bambi is not the brightest story ever, but it is a personal childhood favorite, and I grew up watching this movie a lot. If you haven't watched it before, I highly suggest you go watch it. It is available on Disney+. If you want to see more, feel free to like and subscribe, because kids' videos can't comment on. And if you want and have suggestions for either characters or stories, please feel free to send them to me via either Facebook or Twitter or even Instagram, all of which are linked down below in the description. Bye!